daily, if not hourly, with vast sums of money being made available to businesses and individuals in Wales in a very much in a spirit of collaboration and cooperation. So I think rather than try to make sort of cheap political points, you should acknowledge the fact that actually in these very difficult times, two governments have actually worked quite well together, and the union, which is perhaps the point she doesn't like me to make, the union has been particularly crucial in that process.
Remaining in Wales with Shadow Secretary of State, Neil Griffith.
Before I start, on behalf of the Labour Party, I'd just like to pay tribute to Captain Sir Tom Moore and send our deepest condolences to his family. Now, cockle gathering in both North and South Wales is not just a job, but a way of life dating back generations. Gatherers who are already alarmed at DEFRA advice that they could not resume the export of shellfish until April now feel not just forgotten, but utterly betrayed to discover that UK ministers knew all along that the EU ban on importing non-depurated UK shellfish would be indefinite. So, Mr. Speaker, what urgent action will the Secretary of State and his government take to facilitate the resumption of shellfish exports and save this traditional industry from disappearing forever?
Secretary of State.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And I join the Honourable Lady in her tribute. I know the Right Honourable Friend the Prime Minister will be making a more formal statement in a few minutes' time, but I do recognise, as does the whole House, the comments that she makes. As far as the industry and sector to which she refers is concerned, the government is in, and indeed myself, is in close contact with my colleague Secretary of State in DEFRA, the Cabinet Office, and indeed through the government, the EU, to make the distinction between teething issues which might be arising out of the particular subject she refers to, and perhaps more permanent structural matters which may need a longer-term solution. But I can assure her and the industry that we are very seized of the challenges that they currently face.
Remaining in Wales with Anna McMorran. Anna McMorran.
Mr. Speaker, small businesses in Cardiff North and across the country are struggling to cope with impossible red tape, no time to prepare due to this government's 11th hour Brexit deal. Despite more than 10 days preparing the correct documents and full compliance, a local family export meat business has had their produce turned away in Italy, leading to thousands of pounds of stock being destroyed. The owners have subsequently been up all night, every night, trying to salvage and recoup. They don't want to hear excuses such as teething problems when it's their and their employees' livelihoods on the line. So can the Secretary of State clarify what urgent actions he and his colleagues are taking to resolve these issues? And will he meet with me, along with this business, to see how he can help?
Secretary Hart.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And I received the Honourable Lady's letter only last night about this particular constituent. I'm very happy to meet with her and them to see if we can resolve their particular problems, and that letter is already receiving the urgent attention that it deserves. I would take a challenge with her on the readiness point that she makes more generally, given the numerous levels of engagement which myself and other government colleagues conducted in the run-up to the end of the transition period, and actually the reaction since then from businesses and stakeholders across Wales, which are generally supportive of the fact that a deal has been reached, the opportunities it presents, and the fact that they actually want to get on with now a positive relationship with the EU and the other countries with which we deal.
Question 6, please.
With your permission, Mr. Speaker, I'd like to answer questions 6 and 7 together. I have regular discussion with the Minister for Vaccine Deployment, Defence Ministers and the First Minister of Wales on the delivery of COVID-19 vaccines. Rapid vaccine rollout is key to us getting back to normality.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The work being done in Wrexham to manufacture the vaccine is quite literally saving lives in my constituency in East Surrey. Would the Secretary of State join with me in extending our thanks to all of those workers and the supply chain for the vital work that they're doing to protect the nation?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm delighted to join my honourable friend in that tribute. Prime Minister and I visited Walcart in Wrexham a few weeks ago to see the fantastic work that they're doing. And hers, like so many stories, is a story of a successful union. As we all know with vaccine rollout, this is not a competition between governments, it's a competition between government and COVID. And the union is central to that.
Mr. Speaker, the logistical expertise of Her Majesty's Armed Forces is second to none. What role are defence personnel playing in the vaccine rollout in Wales?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Well, the short answer is a pivotal role in that process, and it's been a joy to behold the unbelievable enthusiasm, dedication, professionalism in Wales from servicemen and women, and also across the rest of the UK. And we are regularly receiving requests from Welsh Government for additional support, and we turn that support round and grant it just as soon as we can.
Let's head to Wales again with Dr. James Davies. Dr. James Davies.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The mid-February target to vaccinate JCVI priority groups 1 to 4 involves offering a dose to all those who are considered clinically extremely vulnerable. What discussions is my right honourable friend having with the Welsh Government regarding the accuracy of data being used in relation to this group?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Well, there are regular discussions, as you might imagine, across all levels of government around data accuracy and the progress that we can make with this particular challenge. He's right to point out it is, of course, a devolved issue. And what we're trying to make sure is where there are issues which are of a more permanent nature, perhaps a persistent data problem, that we can find solutions to that. But the ambition is to get absolutely everybody in those cohorts done within the timescale, and we are on target to achieve that at the moment.
Substantive question to TC.
With permission, Mr. Speaker, I will answer questions 9 and 10 together. My right honourable friend, the Secretary of State, has regular discussions with the First Minister and Welsh ministers on a range of issues, including the UK Shared Prosperity Fund. The Government will continue to engage with Welsh Government as we develop the Fund's investment framework for publication.
Let's head to Wales again with Jonathan Edwards. Jonathan Edwards.
Speaker, from the figures I have seen, the British Government may have conflated overrun spend from the previous convergence period for this financial year with the actual allocation of new money. Under the previous scheme, Wales would receive nearly £400 million per annum. Isn't it the reality that he is unable to guarantee that the Shared Prosperity Fund, when fully operational, will match that level of investment? Why won't he just admit that the communities that both the Secretary of State and I represent in Carmarthenshire are about to get fleeced?
Mr. Speaker, the figures will show that on average Wales is receiving £375 million a year. What the honourable gentleman may be referring to is the fact that over a number of years to follow, there will still be some money coming towards Wales from the European Union. And of course, it's absolutely right that that money should be counted towards the £370 million total. And the Government will guarantee to ensure that the amount of money which is going to be spent in Wales in the future is going to be exactly the same or higher than the amount of money which was spent previously.
Remaining in Wales with Wayne David. Wayne David.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Britain has left the European Union. The transition period has come to an end. There is no new money coming from the structural funds. Now, given that the Government announced the Shared Prosperity Fund back in 2007, can the Minister tell us at least the timetable for the introduction of a new fund?
Well, Mr. Speaker, we've already made it very clear and demonstrated that the amount of money that is going to be spent in Wales following when the SPF comes in is going to be identical or higher than the amount of money that was spent in Wales from the European Union. And there's been absolutely no secrecy about this at all. But of course, the way in which the fund is going to be managed is something which is subject to discussions at this very moment, and I would expect full details to be publicised over the next few months.
And heading across Wales to Ruth Jones. Ruth Jones.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Many of my constituents in Newport West are very sorry to see the hundreds of millions of pounds of EU funding that Wales received in recent years come to an end. Our departure from the EU made this inevitable, and of course I accept this, but they also believe that the Welsh Government should have full autonomy over its part of the Shared Prosperity Fund, and I agree with them. So can the Minister provide some evidence that this working together is taking place? Thank you.
Well, Mr. Speaker, I'm sure that the Honourable Lady's constituents will be delighted to know that hundreds of millions of pounds will continue to be spent in Wales. And I'm sure the Honourable Lady's constituents will want to know that that money is going to be spent where it's most needed. And I'm sure the Honourable Lady's constituents will be rather disappointed that we already know from the Welsh Audit Office report that some of the money that's gone into, for example, Pillar 2 agricultural funding hasn't been well spent. And I would urge the Honourable Lady to recommend to her constituents that they look at the dossier that was brought forward by my friend, the Honourable Member for Montgomeryshire, which demonstrates that millions of pounds of European Union money that was handled by the Welsh Government was misspent. When that money becomes British taxpayers' money, all partners in the British Government, the Welsh Government and local authorities and growth deals are going to want to make sure that that money is properly spent, and I'm sure her constituents will agree.
Remaining in Wales with Beth Winter. Beth Winter.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Question 12.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. I have regular discussions with my Right Honourable friend, the Secretary of State for Work and Pensions, on our support for people affected by COVID-19. The UK Government has funded the furlough of 8,900 employees and provided over £17 million to the self-employed in the Honourable Member's own constituency.
Beth Winter. If not, I'll come back. Beth Winter.
Mr Speaker, the pandemic has exposed the inadequacies of our welfare system to act as a safety net for people, from the insufficient level of statutory sick pay to the damaging impact of the two-child benefit limit on families. Universal basic income is gaining increasing traction as a solution to many of these issues, and is increasing support in Wales and others for a UBI pilot funded by UK Government. Will the Secretary of State express his support for such a pilot and call on UK Government to fund this?
Well, Mr Speaker, the UK Government have already provided £5 billion of extra funding to the Welsh Government to ensure that they have adequate funds to support businesses and individuals who have been affected by the COVID pandemic. And of course, the Welsh Government also have tax-raising powers. The reality is, Mr Speaker, that this Government has spent hundreds and hundreds of billions of pounds supporting businesses and individuals throughout this country. Such is our commitment to ensuring that nobody is left out as a result of the impact of this terrible pandemic.
Let's answer the Shadow Secretary of State with the first of two questions. Dear Griffith.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. The last year has been immensely challenging for many Welsh families who've seen their lives completely upended by the virus. Now, despite welcome progress on vaccinations, the pandemic's not going away overnight, and many still feel grave uncertainty about the future of their jobs and their family finances. So can I ask the Minister, why does his government think that now is the time to cut universal credit by £1,000 a year, hitting over 200,000 Welsh families who are doing their best to get by?
Mr Speaker, I have not yet been promoted to the Treasury, and I can't possibly predict what might happen in the budget that may or may not come in a few months' time. Perhaps the Honourable Lady knows something that the rest of us don't. But I can say to the Honourable Lady that this Government have been steadfast in their commitment to supporting all those who have been left out. And may I just point out that we will come through this crisis quickly as a result of the Government's wise decision not to take part in the European Union vaccination scheme, which is why we have now vaccinated 14% of the population of the United Kingdom.
We go back to Neil Griffith. Neil Griffith.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Now, anyone who took the initiative and started their own business within a year of the pandemic hitting was completely shut out of the self-employed support scheme when it was announced last March. Many turned to universal credit as their only option. Now, nearly a year on, and with last year's tax returns submitted to HMRC, will the government think again, close the gaps in support and give the newly self-employed the help that they deserve?
Mr Speaker, the Honourable Lady knows very well that I'm not responsible for the policies of the Treasury, but I can simply point to the fact that we have provided over £9.3 billion of additional support through the welfare system for people affected by COVID, including the £20 a week increase to the Universal Credit Standard Allowance. The Government's commitment to supporting all those who have been affected by this pandemic is very, very clear to all.
Mr Speaker.
Mr Speaker, we have provided £16.8 billion to the devolved administrations to fight coronavirus, including £5.2 billion to the Welsh Government and £8.6 billion to the Scottish Government. We've also secured vaccines for all 4 nations, demonstrating the importance of the Union and how we are stronger together.
So, Speaker, the fiscal settlement of this United Kingdom means the Treasury continues to impose unfair and unreasonable, inexplicable limits on the devolved nations' borrowing powers. This has meant that at every step throughout the COVID crisis, the devolved nations have had to wait for the Treasury to announce financial support before they could do the same. The next challenge is climate action, and with evidence from the Disgupta review and the Committee on Climate Change showing how far we've got to go, will the government now ensure the devolved nations are fully equipped to meet this challenge by devolving borrowing powers?
Well, Mr. Speaker, I would have thought that the Scottish people, with their reputation for understanding the importance of money, would be quite pleased that the UK government has provided £8.2 billion of extra funding for the Scottish Parliament, rather than expecting them to borrow money and pay it back at some point. And I would suggest that the honourable gentleman might like to familiarise himself with a report from the LSE this morning, which suggested that independence for Scotland would end up costing every Scottish taxpayer thousands of pounds a year, in addition to the £8 billion that they would have lost as a result of the UK government providing that extra money to the Scottish Parliament.
Question number 16, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The UK government has taken significant steps to support and promote the Welsh lamb exports around the world. These include securing a tariff-free to quota-free deal with the EU and securing the protection of the Welsh lamb geographical indicator as part of the Japan deal.
The
rules on international trade require SBS rules to be based on risk and science. So will the government put immediate pressure on the European Union to lift the unreasonable compliance requirements that they're imposing on British food exports, because they are disproportionate given that our food standards and rules are amongst the very toughest in the whole world?
Secretary Hart.
My right honourable friend is absolutely right, particularly in her last point, and I can offer that guarantee. We are in regular contact with our colleagues in the EU about this specific point, and there are meetings later this week involving the Chancellor of Duchy of Lancaster on this and related issues.
Mr. Speaker, as the Honourable Lady mentioned, lamb exporters in West Wales have raised similar concerns about the delays that they're facing at EU ports, reporting that some shipments have been held by customs officials for 2 to 3 days due to these supposed issues with animal health export certificates. Can the Secretary of State enlighten us whether he expects an urgent resolution to this problem?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I don't know whether how urgent would be defined in the EU at the moment, but certainly there is an urgency to resolve some of these problems. As I've mentioned and in answer to an early question, there are some teething issues around this which can be resolved quite quickly. If there are longer-term structural issues, they need to be looked at in more detail. But it is also worth pointing out, because I share sheep farming interests in my constituency, as the Honourable Member does, that there are some big opportunities across the rest of the world which we should be exploring, rather than necessarily just concentrating on some of the difficulties with the EU.
Craig Williams.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Welsh lamb is a premium product that's wanted across the world. Welsh bull livestock market, which is usually the heart of my farming community, is quieter because of COVID, but I will say the lamb prices, sheep meat prices are robust still. Can I ask the Secretary of State, building on the points previously of the two honourable members, about the SBS issues, whether he can convene with industry, with myself and with farmers and the slaughterhouses in Montgomeryshire to meet to discuss the health certificates and those wider SBS issues which are clearly out of order on the EU border?
Secretary Hart.
I'm always happy to meet with my honourable friend and his constituents. I used to live in his constituency, so I know some of them quite well, and he's right to raise this particular issue. And I did. One of the companies in question is meeting with the Cabinet Office, I believe, later this week. That's progress. I'm delighted Welsh Bull Mart's done some good business. I see that lamb prices increased around 17% in 2021, and consumer spending was £652 million. But the rest of the world opportunities that I mentioned, particularly the Gulf, the Middle East and the US, once we get the small ruminant rule resolved, are going to help the lamb industry across Wales and the UK.
Substantive question to Secretary Hart.
Thank you, Mr. I'm going to press on anyway. The Wales Office recognises the importance of apprenticeships and the opportunity they provide. We have funded dedicated apprenticeship roles since 2011 and continue to be fully committed to the apprenticeship scheme.
Let's head over to Robert Halfon. Robert Halfon.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Will my right honourable friend outline what progress the Wales government has made towards meeting the public sector apprenticeship target of 2.3% and what progress frontline services in Wales, such as the police, have made in offering apprenticeships to their employees?
Secretary Hart.
Well, Mr. Speaker, I'm delighted that the my honourable friend has raised this point because, of course, public sector apprenticeship target is applicable only to bodies in England. But he raises a really critical point about devolution. And we're concerned, as one example, that Welsh police forces, that being that example, are paying into the apprenticeship levy scheme, but they're not getting anything out of it because Welsh Government does not support police apprenticeships. So I'm perhaps suggesting to him that it would be a very interesting topic for his committee to look at as to why Welsh forces are paying in but actually getting nothing out the other end by way of apprenticeships.
Substantive question to Secretary Hart. Secretary Hart, substantive question.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. We've agreed a deal which provides Welsh business with exceptional access to the EU market. It's the first time ever that the EU has agreed a zero tariff, zero quota deal.
Turning to Wales with Stephen Crabb. Stephen Crabb.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Getting the Brexit deal across the line before the end of the year was important, and huge credit to the government for securing this. But we do have a serious situation emerging at Welsh ports with freight levels way down on where they should be. So could I ask my right honourable friend to work urgently with ministerial colleagues, with HMRC and with the trade bodies to find simpler solutions to the problem of checks and paperwork, which risks making the UK land bridge more costly and less attractive for trade between Ireland and the continent?
Secretary Hart.
I am very grateful for my right honourable friend's question. As he knows, I'm in touch with Pembroke, Fishguard, Holyhead about this particular issue, trying to make a distinction between what we can assign to sort of COVID changes in business and perhaps the more permanent other factors that he refers to. There are some complications around port infrastructure, which are the responsibility of Welsh Government. We've got meetings tomorrow to try and push Welsh Government to get that process underway more quickly. We've got discussions with road hauliers around the land bridge, but I absolutely assure him we want this business to return to as near as possible, as soon as possible. Very happy to work with him and others in achieving that goal.
Okay. Prime Minister. Okay. Order, order. Before we come to the Prime Minister's questions, I want to express on behalf of the whole House our deep sadness at the death of Captain Sir Tom Moore. His dignity and determination in raising money to support the NHS charities caught the nation's mood at the most difficult time. He exemplified the best of our values. I know the whole House will want to join me in sending our condolences to his family and his many friends. I invite members to now join me for a minute's silence to commemorate Sir Tom's life and to pay our respects to those who have lost their lives as a result of the COVID and their families and friends. Order. We now come to questions to the Prime Minister. I will first call the Prime Minister to answer the engagements question. I will then call Claire Anna to ask her supplementary. Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, Captain Sir Tom Moore, or Captain Tom as we all came to know him, dedicated his life to serving his country and others. His was a long life lived well, whether during his time defending our nation as an army officer, and last year bringing the country together through his incredible fundraising drive for the NHS that gave millions a chance to thank the extraordinary men and women of our NHS who've protected us in this pandemic. As Captain Tom repeatedly reminded us, please remember tomorrow will be a good day. He inspired the very best in us all, and his legacy will continue to do so for generations to come. Mr. Speaker, we now all have the opportunity to show our appreciation for him and all that he stood for and believed in. That's why I encourage everyone to join in a national clap for Captain Tom and all those health workers for whom he raised money at 6 p.m. this evening. Mr. Speaker, this morning I had meetings with ministerial colleagues and others. In addition to my duties in this House, I shall have further such meetings later today.
Let's head over to Northern Ireland with Claire Hanna. Claire Hanna.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and certainly echo those words about Captain Tom, a decent and inspiring man. The SDLP warned for the last 5 years about the destabilising impact Brexit would have in Northern Ireland, though we take no pleasure in the disruption nor in the injury some feel to their British identity. The last few days have seen a rash and thankfully withdrawn decision by the European Commission, which was condemned by all parties here and both governments, and unfortunately followed by sporadic criminal behaviour and threats. Will the Prime Minister, in affirming the rule of law in Northern Ireland, to consider seriously the impact of their words and work together through the available structures to ensure that the new arrangements work for everybody in Northern Ireland?
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I certainly agree with the Honourable Lady that it was most regrettable that the EU should seem to cast doubt on the Good Friday Agreement, the principles of the peace process, by seeming to call for a border across the island of Ireland. And I can tell her that we will work to ensure that there are no such borders. We will respect the peace process and indeed no barriers down the Irish Sea, and that the principle of unfettered access across all parts of our United Kingdom is upheld.
Theresa May.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and may I join the whole House in paying tribute to Captain Sir Tom Moore, who was indeed an inspiration to all of us and a beacon of light at a time of darkness and a true gentleman. I'm sure my right honourable friend is aware that my 10-minute rule bill would increase the maximum penalty for death by dangerous driving to life imprisonment. The policy and the bill have cross-party support. The policy has government support, the bill does not. The government says it will introduce the policy in its sentencing bill, of which we have seen as yet no sign. So will the government now give government time to my bill to ensure this necessary change is put on the statute book as soon as possible?
Prime Minister.
I'm very grateful to my right honourable friend, and she's absolutely right to campaign for punishments that fit the crime, and we're therefore bringing forward exactly those changes, Mr. Speaker, and in our forthcoming sentencing bill, and our proposals, I believe, will go as far, if not even further, than those that she wants, by raising the maximum penalty for causing death by careless driving when under the influence of drugs or alcohol, and they will tighten the law for those who cause serious injury by careless driving.
We now come to the Leader of the Opposition, Keir Starmer.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can I join you and the Prime Minister in sending my condolences to the family of Captain Sir Tom Moore? He, perhaps more than anyone, embodied the spirit of Britain, and he will be sadly missed. And I welcome the initiative that the Prime Minister spoke of a clap this evening. Mr. Speaker, our thoughts are also with the family of Maureen Colquhoun, the first openly lesbian MP and a great champion of women's rights. Mr. Speaker, let me pay tribute to our NHS and all of those on the front line who are delivering the vaccine. Today we're likely to hit 10 million vaccinations, which is remarkable. The biggest risk to the vaccine programme at the moment is the arrival of new variants, such as the South African variant. On that issue, the government's own scientist, Sage, said 2 weeks ago, and I quote, "Only a complete preemptive closure of borders or the mandatory quarantine of all visitors upon arrival can get close to fully preventing new cases or new variants." So pretty clear. So why did the Prime Minister choose not to do the one thing that Sage said could prevent new variants coming to the United Kingdom?
Prime Minister.
Well, actually, Mr. Speaker, Sage did not recommend a complete ban, and they say that travel bans should not be relied upon to stop importation of new variants. But we do have, Mr. Speaker, one of the toughest regimes in the world, and anybody coming from South Africa not only has to do a test before they come here, but anybody coming from South Africa now, British citizens returning from South Africa now, will find themselves obliged to go into quarantine for 10 days, and they will have an isolations assurance agency checking up on them, and it is illegal now, Mr. Speaker, to go on holiday in this country. It is illegal to travel from South Africa or all the countries on the current red list. And we will be going forward, Mr. Speaker, with a plan to ensure that people coming into this country from those red list countries immediately have to go into government-mandated quarantine hospitality.
Keir Starmer.
Mr. Speaker, I'm intrigued by the Prime Minister's answer. I don't think he disputes what Sage's view was, that only a complete closure or comprehensive quarantine of all arrivals will work. He doesn't seem to dispute that. He says it simply wasn't a recommendation. I would ask the Prime Minister to publish the full Sage minutes so that we can see what was said in full, or if there's some other advice, perhaps publish that. Because the situation is this: we know the South African variant is spreading across England and measures are in place to try to deal with that. We also know that other variants are out there in other parts of the world. So is the Prime Minister really saying, just as a matter of common sense, is he saying that quarantining all arrivals would make no difference to fighting new variants of the virus? Or is he saying that quarantining all arrivals at the border would make a difference, but it's too difficult to do it?
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, this is the right honourable gentleman who only recently said that quarantine measures were a blunt instrument, and whose Shadow Transport Secretary said that quarantine should be lessened. We have one of the toughest regimes in the world, and I think when he calls for a complete closure of borders, or suggests that that might be an option, Mr. Speaker, he should be aware that 75% of our medicines come into this country from the European continent, 45% of our food. 250,000 businesses in this country rely on imports. It is not practical completely to close off this country, as he seems to be suggesting. What is practical to do is have one of the toughest regimes in the world, and to get on with vaccinating the people of this country, which is what we are doing, Mr. Speaker.
Mr. Speaker, what he says about the Labour position is complete nonsense. He knows it. It's the 3rd of February 2021. We've new variants in the country, our schools are shut, and our borders are open. Everybody knows there are exceptions, whatever the quarantine regime. Everybody knows that. And that's not what this question is about. The position is this: 21,000 people are coming into this country every day. The Prime Minister's new border arrangements are still weeks away from being implemented and will only affect direct flights from some countries. We know from the first wave of the pandemic that only 0.1% of virus cases came from China, where we had restrictions, whereas 62% came indirectly from France and Spain, where there were no restrictions. Why does the Prime Minister think that the variants of the virus will behave differently and only arrive in the UK by direct flights?
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, he can't have it both ways. He simultaneously says that he wants the borders to be kept open for freight reasons or to allow businesses to carry on. I think that was what he was saying, whilst calling for tougher quarantine measures, which is exactly what this government imposed as soon as we became aware of the new variant, Mr. Speaker. And I repeat what you have to do if you want to come into this country from abroad. You have to 72 hours before you fly. You have to get a test, Mr. Speaker. You have to have a passenger locator form. You're kicked off the plane if you don't have it. You then have to spend 10 days, Mr. Speaker, in quarantine. If you come from one of the red list countries, Mr. Speaker, you have to go straight into quarantine. And all of this, of course, is to allow us to get on with the vaccination programme. And if it had listened to the right honourable gentleman, Mr. Speaker, we would still be at the starting blocks, because he wanted to stay in the European Medicines Agency, Mr. Speaker, and said so 4 times from that dispatch box.
Nonsense. Don't let the truth get in the way of a pre-prepared gag. Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister knows I've never said that from this dispatch box or anywhere else, but the truth escapes him. Mr. Speaker, he describes the current arrangements. If they were working, the variant wouldn't be in the country, the single biggest threat to the vaccine system. Mr. Speaker, let me turn to another area where the government's been slow to act, the cladding crisis. This is affecting millions of people, and I can't tell the Prime Minister how anxious and angry people feel about this. It's now 3.5 years since the Grenfell tragedy, which took 72 lives. So can the Prime Minister tell the House and the country why, 3.5 years on, are there still hundreds of thousands of people living in homes with unsafe cladding, 3.5 years on, and why are millions of leaseholders in homes that they can't sell and facing extortionate costs?
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, in respect of the honourable gentleman's last answer, may I advise him to consult YouTube, where he will find an answer. He raises a very important point about cladding and the predicament of some leaseholders, of many leaseholders, and he's absolutely right, Mr. Speaker. This is a problem that needs to be fixed. This government is getting on with it. 95% of the high-rise buildings with unsafe ACM cladding work is either underway, they are either complete or underway to remove that cladding, Mr. Speaker. I very much appreciate and sympathise with the predicament of leaseholders who are in that situation, but we are working to clear the backlog, and I can tell him that my right honourable friend, the Chancellor and the Community Secretary will be coming forward with a full package to address the issue.
Mr. Speaker, whatever the Prime Minister claims being done isn't working. Because this is the situation. Through no fault of their own, huge numbers of people, especially leaseholders, are stuck in the middle. They are living in unsafe homes. They can't sell, and they're being asked to foot the bill. That's the situation that they are in. Take, for example, Will Martin. He's a doctor who's got a flat in Sheffield. He's been spending his days on the front line fighting COVID in the NHS. He spends his nights worrying about the £52,000 bill that he now has to pay for fire safety repairs. He doesn't want future promises, Prime Minister. He doesn't want to hear that it's all been sorted when he knows that it hasn't. He wants to know here and now, will he or will he not have to pay that £52,000 bill?
Mr. Speaker, we're determined that no leaseholder should have to pay for the unaffordable costs of fixing safety defects that they didn't cause under no fault of their own. And that's why, in addition to the 1.6 billion we're putting in to remove the ACM and the UPL cladding, we are also setting up and have set up a £1 billion building safety fund, which has already processed over almost 3,000 claims. And I sympathise very much with the gentleman Dr. Martin, that he mentions, and I hope very much that his particular case can be addressed in the course of the forthcoming package that will be produced by my right honourable friends.
There are thousands and thousands of people in exactly the same position. I spoke to leaseholders caught in the middle of this on Monday. One of them was Hayley. She's already gone bankrupt, Mr. Prime Minister. She's 27. She bought a flat, she's lost it, she's now bankrupt. It's too late for her. Those leaseholders that I spoke to had three very simple asks. This is what they want: immediate upfront funding for unsafe blocks, a deadline of next year to make buildings safe, and protection for leaseholders. We put those forward for a vote on Monday. The Prime Minister says he's determined to do something about it. What did he do? He ordered his MPs to abstain. If the Prime Minister is serious about moving this forward and ending this injustice, will he commit today to those simple asks from leaseholders?
Mr. Speaker, we're getting on with the job of helping leaseholders across the country by remediating their buildings. And in addition to the funds I've already mentioned, I can tell him that we're also introducing a £30 million fund to install alarms and other interim measures. And we're making it very clear to the mortgage industry that they should be supporting people living in such accommodation, and and making it clear to all sectors of the industry that people living in such homes should not be tied up in the whole EWS1 process. And that will benefit about 450,000 homeowners, Mr. Speaker. I think he's right to raise the problem, but we're getting on with addressing it, Mr. Speaker. And we're getting on with addressing the fundamental problem that afflicts this country, and that is the COVID pandemic. And that's why I'm pleased that we've now done 10 million first vaccinations across the country. And I repeat, Mr. Speaker, had we listened to the right honourable gentleman, we would be stuck at go, because he's shaking his head, but he can check the record. Several times he said that this country should remain in the European Medicines Agency. And if he wishes to on a point of order, to correct me, because he said it was wrong just now, I think he should study the record and he'll find that is exactly what he did. We want to get this country safe again. We want schools to come back. Mr. Speaker, he continues to refuse to say that schools aren't safe, Mr. Speaker. And on the contrary, he spends his time looking at Labour focus groups who tell him that he should stop sitting on the fence.
And Prime Minister,
Mr. Speaker,
no, Prime Minister, just in fairness, I think we've got to be somewhere near the question that was asked, and I don't want you to go around the world answering every problem and issue. There's a lot more questions who's going to allow you to do that, and the first one's coming, Marco Longi.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And may I join the Prime Minister with his moving words towards Captain Sir Tom Moore, who was an inspiration to each and every one of us in this country and beyond, may I say. Mr. Speaker, the Priory Boxing Club in Dudley has produced many champions, including Ryan Aston, who became champion 5 times in this country. May I ask the Prime Minister to join me in paying tribute to Paul Goff at the club, who is working with young boys and girls who are often who have been excluded from mainstream education. And may I ask him also to pay tribute to the council leader, Patrick Harley, who has agreed and is supporting a new school in partnership with the club to ensure that these young people are actually going to be getting academic qualifications, as well increased self-belief and new opportunities for the future.
Mr. Speaker, I thank my honourable friend for raising this excellent club, and I'm happy to join my honourable friend in paying tribute to the work of Paul Goff and Patrick Harley, everybody at that Priory Boxing Club. And I know from personal experience what a huge difference it can make, not just to young people's fitness, but also to their educational success to attend boxing clubs, Mr. Speaker.
Let's head up to the leader of the SNP in Skye and Lochaber, Ian Blackford.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And can I associate myself with your remarks about the remarkable gentleman, Captain Sir Tom Moore? Everything that he's done, he has been an inspiration to each and every one of us. And I would like to send my condolences to his family and friends. Mr. Speaker, last week, we told the Prime Minister it was wrong for him to visit Scotland in the middle of a pandemic. We told him it was a non-essential visit. Mr. Speaker, this morning, the Daily Record newspaper revealed that the Prime Minister knew that the Livingston plant that he was visiting had an outbreak of 14 COVID cases just 24 hours earlier. There are serious questions to answer. Did the Prime Minister and his advisors know about the COVID outbreak? When did they know? And when did the Prime Minister make the irresponsible decision to go ahead with what was a PR stunt?
Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I can think of a few things more important than to see the rollout of the vaccination programme across this country, to encourage the wonderful companies who are doing great work across the whole of Scotland, to see the commitment of those Scottish scientists to helping us all to defeat the pandemic, and it was fantastic to talk to them, Mr. Speaker. And I would just repeat that the government remains, as I said yesterday, very willing to help Scotland with the rollout of vaccines across the whole of the UK.
Returning to Ian Blackford. Ian Blackford.
And there is the wow factor once again with the Prime Minister. What an absolute shambles that he's gone to a plant where there was a COVID outbreak, and the Prime Minister can't just explain away this absolutely shocking error of judgment. Anyone can see that his campaign trip to Scotland was utterly, utterly reckless. The Daily Record story is very clear. The Prime Minister and his advisers knew there was a serious COVID outbreak at this plant. They knew the visit posed a risk, but they made a deliberate choice. They made the irresponsible choice. The Prime Minister put politics before public health. Prime Minister, why be so reckless? Is it any wonder that people in Scotland have no faith in this Prime Minister? Isn't he the worst possible leader at the worst possible time?
Mr. Speaker, I think what the people of Scotland want to see is the whole country pulling together and working to develop the vaccine, as that fantastic plant in Scotland is doing. One of the advantages of the Valneva vaccine is that it may be able to combat all sorts of variants in a very comprehensive way. It's amazing, wonderful to see Scottish scientists working to do that. I had a fantastic time. Nobody, by the way, raised that issue with me before or since, and it is my job, Mr. Speaker, to visit every part of this country. Nothing and no one, Mr. Speaker, is going to stop me, and I am very, very proud of the record of the government in rolling out the vaccine. As I say, the offer, it remains open to the Scottish Nationalist Party, where their National Party, if they insist, though they are also nationalists, Mr. Speaker, we're there to help the rollout of the vaccine if do more were they to decide that is necessary, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Closing the attainment gap has always been at the heart of our education policy, and yet we know that the pandemic is having a devastating effect on our children's education. I welcome the Prime Minister's commitment to prioritise the opening of our schools. Would he also agree with me that we must put the catch-up of children's missed education at the centre of our recovery programme?
Yes, indeed, Mr. Speaker. That's the single most, I think, of all the challenges now facing the country. It is remedying the damage to children's education. Yes, of course, we've got to clear up the backlog in the NHS. We have problems in the courts, but it is education that is going to be the focus of this government, Mr. Speaker, and repairing the differential learning that's taken place during the crisis.
Let's head to Northern Ireland with Stephen Farry. Stephen Farry.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. We need to be open and honest on the reasons why the Northern Ireland Protocol exists, but do all we can to make its implementation as easy as possible. So in that spirit, in the talks with the EU that will take place over the coming days, will the Prime Minister make it a priority to seek a UK-EU veterinary agreement, which would help both with respect to the Northern Ireland Protocol, but also all UK food exporters?
Mr. Speaker, I'm very grateful to the honourable gentleman, and we do think that it is very important that the protocol should not place unnecessary barriers or barriers of any kind down the Irish Sea. It was, as I said to a colleague earlier, I think it was most unfortunate that the EU seemed to want to impose a barrier across the island of Ireland. We seek to make sure there are no such barriers, Mr. Speaker, down the Irish Sea.
I said to Gloucestershire with Lawrence Robertson. Lawrence Robertson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Some of my constituents had their Christmases ruined because the heavy rainfall and local inappropriate development caused foul water to enter their homes, causing them great difficulties. So will the Prime Minister appoint a statutory body with the specific and undeniable responsibility of ensuring that no developments can automatically tap into existing drainage systems, and that before developments begin, a full assessment is made of the local drainage capacity, and if that capacity would be inadequate, that the development does not begin until the infrastructure is upgraded?
Prime Minister.
Well, I will study the very interesting proposals that my honourable friend makes, but in the meantime, I will raise them particularly with the Environment Agency, who I think do a fantastic job in managing local areas that are prone to flooding, to putting in the necessary defences. And I know that our colleagues across the House will have seen the work of the Environment Agency across the country, and we're making another £5.2 billion investment into additional flood defences, which I know will benefit his constituents in Gloucestershire and across the country.
Sorry, thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Prime Minister was not born in this country. My parents were not born in this country. I was, but we are all British. There are, however, hundreds of thousands of children, including in my constituency in Streatham, who, like us, born or raised here, are entitled to citizenship but priced out by a £1,012 fee. Without it, they face barriers to university, work, healthcare, renting a home or opening a bank account. Does the Prime Minister agree with me that it's wrong that the government makes 60% profit on these applications? And will he take steps to reduce or even end citizenship fees for children?
Mr. Speaker, I think that British citizenship is a wonderful thing, and it's fantastic that so many EU nationals have taken up the opportunity to become British in the course of the last few years. I'm interested in the point that the honourable lady makes. I will study it, but clearly there are costs that must be borne by the taxpayer, and I think that she will appreciate that citizenship at any time of life is a very considerable prize and worth investing in.
Thank you,
Mr. Speaker. The police have been one of our public services have been absolutely essential during the pandemic. So will my right honourable friend join me in welcoming the fact that the Kent Police and Crime Commissioner Matthew Scott has announced another 145 police officers during this year, bringing to the total of 800 extra police we have on the streets of Kent, and most importantly that this has been accompanied by a reduction of 17,000 in the crime numbers in Kent this year.
Mr. Speaker, I thank my right honourable friend, who's a long-standing and redoubtable campaigner for law and order and for the police, and I also congratulate Police and Crime Commissioner Matthew Scott for what he's doing to back the police and to recruit more police in Kent, and that's why we are putting another 20,000 more officers on the streets of this country, and I think we've already recruited about 6,000, Mr. Speaker.
Let's head up to the northeast with Julie Elliott. Julie Elliott.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Last week, the government responded to concerns from our care workers by stating, "We're immensely proud of all our care workers do." This is a sentiment we all share, yet in the very same statement, the government sought to pass the buck for the way our care workers have been treated by saying the vast majority of care workers are employed by private providers and that the government does not set levels of pay for care workers. Why won't this government commit to ensuring our care workers are paid a wage they can live on?
Mr. Speaker, this government is proud of not only setting up the national living wage, but making sure that we had record-breaking increases both last year and this year. And that is the most important thing we can do for care workers and workers across the country.
Let's head up to see Joy Morrissey. Joy Morrissey.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And may I thank the Prime Minister for prioritising schools during this pandemic. And will the Prime Minister confirm that this remains the case? And on Children's Mental Health Week, will the Prime Minister work with parents and frontline children's charities to minimise the disruption to children and to their mental health caused by this pandemic?
Prime Minister.
grateful to my honourable friend for what she does to champion this very, very important cause. And it is Children's Mental Health Week this week, and partly in recognition of the extent of the problem and the issue across the whole of the country, we've announced a new youth mental health ambassador who's going to be working with the government, Dr. Alex George, who'll be working with the government to underline the importance of mental health resilience, Mr. Speaker, and making everybody in our country better able to deal with some of the problems that life throws in our way.
Into Northern Ireland with Ian Paisley. Ian Paisley.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and may I too express condolences to the family of Captain Sir Tom Moore, an inspirational and wonderful gentleman. Prime Minister, you say that your commitment to Northern Ireland is unshakable. Well, I speak for all of my constituents today when I tell you that the protocol has betrayed us and has made us feel like foreigners in our own country. Tea and sympathy will not cut the mustard. So what is the Prime Minister actually going to do when the Prime Minister realises that the EU will do nothing to help Northern Ireland? Will the Prime Minister use all of the instruments at his disposal? Will he use, if necessary, his parliamentary majority? Will he legislate, if necessary, to remove the impediments to trade in Northern Ireland? And will he be a man of his word and allow businessmen in my constituency to bin the unnecessary documentation that he told us we could bin? Prime Minister, be the unionist we need you to be.
I utterly share the frustration of the honourable gentleman about the way the EU, in particular, the EU Commission, temporarily seem to call for you to use the protocol in such a way as to impose a border contrary to the spirit of the Good Friday Agreement, contrary to the letter of the Good Friday Agreement. And we will do everything we need to do, Mr. Speaker, whether legislatively or indeed by invoking Article 16 of the protocol, Mr. Speaker, to ensure that there is no barrier down the Irish Sea, and the honourable gentleman's business constituents, some of whom I know very well and admire very much, can continue to do business unfettered between Northern Ireland and the rest of this country.
Speaker, may I congratulate my right honourable friend on his calm handling of the European Commission's misbehaviour over vaccines in Northern Ireland. Nevertheless, we can learn something from our European friends. Andalusia, a Spanish province of 8 million people, had a COVID death rate of about 190 deaths per million in November, higher than ours at the time. After giving activated vitamin D, calcifidiol, to care home residents and some GP patients, that death rate almost halved, whilst ours was doubling. Can he ask his advisers to look urgently again at the very latest Spanish research about this cheap, safe and apparently effective treatment?
I'm very grateful to my right honourable friend, and we will continue to monitor all the evidence about the efficacy of vitamin D in the treatment that he mentions. I'm well aware of it, and indeed we've discussed it before personally, Mr. Speaker, and I'll keep him updated on the review that's currently taking place.
Let's head up to the northwest with Rosie Cooper. Rosie Cooper.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Scammerdale residents believe that they are an island of forgotten people. It's a 60s new town with very poor public transport and one of the lowest levels of car and vehicle ownership. For many, the only means of getting to doctors, schools, shops or visiting loved ones is through 87 underpasses, many of which flood every time there's rain. Will the Prime Minister ask his officials to work with Lancashire County Council to find and fund a permanent, and I do mean a permanent solution, which doesn't involve providing canoes? Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
I appreciate the desire of the honourable lady to. I am aware of the problem that she refers to in the flooding in the underground in the tunnels. We will certainly work with Lancashire County Council to mitigate the problem, to sort it out. But we are, and just to repeat, we have the funds available, and we'll make sure that it's done, Mr. Speaker.
Jenkinson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. We were delighted to hear that Maryport in my constituency of Workington was successful in our bid for a future High Streets Fund, one of my Right Honourable Friend's 50 additional towns announced last August, and a bid I led when I was Deputy Leader of Allerdale Borough Council. We're hoping too for a positive outcome to our Towns Fund bid for Workington. Can I take this opportunity to thank my Right Honourable Friend for all he's doing for my constituents and levelling up across the United Kingdom, and invite him, as soon as he is able, to visit my constituency to see for himself its potential.
Well, I want to thank my honourable friend, who is a fantastic advocate of the people of Workington, and never fails, Mr. Speaker, to put their interests before me. And I will do everything I can to help him, and I will check my diary commitments to see when I can get there, and I hope it will be as soon as possible.
Let's head to Wales with Howell Williams. Howell Williams.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Delivery of important letters, packets and parcels in the Carnarvon area have been delayed for days and weeks by a COVID outbreak amongst local postal workers. The Prime Minister will, I'm sure, join me in wishing my constituents a speedy recovery. But what is his government doing during this health crisis to make sure that the once world-beating, but by now privatised Royal Mail is sufficiently robust to fulfil its duty to the public, particularly in rural areas?
Mr. Speaker, the most important thing we can do, and I pass on my sympathies to all those affected by the outbreak of COVID that he describes. I think the most important thing we can do is continue to roll out the vaccination programme, and we want to get key workers such as postal workers as fast as we possibly can. We're already at 10 million across the whole country. We've got to get down the JCVI groups 1 to 9, Mr. Speaker, the most vulnerable groups. But postal workers over 50 will certainly be included in that group. But after that, we want to get down to all key workers who come into regular contact with others and who may be exposed to the virus, Mr. Speaker.
Kent with Tracy Crouch. Tracy.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Prime Minister will be aware that the second wave of coronavirus has had a significant impact on the mental well-being of frontline nurses and doctors, with many in critical care units facing continuous shifts with dismal survival rates, causing a level of psychological harm that may result in PTSD. With this in mind, will he look at utilising the military understanding of this condition and urgently invest in training sufficient numbers of psychology professionals to support our heroic nurses and doctors fighting on the front line of this battle against COVID-19?
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, my right honourable friend raises an extremely important point about PTSD in the NHS and NHS staff who do an amazing job treating us all. And I will certainly look at the particular recommendation that she now makes, but clearly we're as part of the £52 billion package of investment that we're making in the last year into the NHS. We will be making sure that we support staff working on the front line, their mental health, and making sure that they have all the health and well-being helplines that they need, all the advice and counselling that they need to get through what has been for all of them a really, really difficult time.
Let's head up to Lanark with Angela Crawley. Angela Crawley.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Yesterday, the Scottish Government announced that they would go further than the Prime Minister and introduce a comprehensive system of supervised quarantine for those entering the country. It is evidently clear that countries that have employed an effective international quarantine measure are now reaping the rewards of reopening their economies and reducing the unnecessary loss of life. Faced with the overwhelming evidence that importing new cases and variants could undermine our efforts again, why is the Prime Minister watching, waiting and hoping for the best when we know that his dithering on crucial decisions has already had catastrophic consequences?
Mr. Speaker, I don't think anybody wants to take any lectures on speed of rollout or delivery of programmes from the Scottish Nationalist Party, but I want her to know that the government will be very, very happy to help with accelerating the rollout of the vaccine programme, as we said yesterday, and the offer is there. And vaccination of the people of this country is the single most important thing we need to do now together to beat this pandemic.
Let's head to Hertfordshire with Stephen McPartland. Stephen McPartland.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Millions of leaseholders are living in fear because they have no idea how safe their buildings are, and they're also facing staggering bills which they cannot afford. Can the Prime Minister assure me that leaseholders will not have to pay to fix these historic fire safety defects, and also rule out loans to leaseholders, which are not a solution?
Yes, Mr. Speaker, as I said earlier on, we're absolutely clear that leaseholders should not have to worry about the costs of fixing historic safety defects that they didn't cause, but I appreciate the sympathy and care with which he represents their interests.
We're now heading to Stephen Timms. Stephen Timms.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It's been estimated that 40,000 people were scammed out of their pensions in the 5 years after the pension freedoms took effect in 2015. Attractive deals on Google or Facebook turn out all too often to be a fraud. So will the Prime Minister ensure that the planned online harms bill tackles online financial harms in order to address this very serious problem?
He makes an excellent point, Mr. Speaker, about online fraud. It is becoming an increasing concern of the government and I think of people across the country. People must be vigilant. We will look at what we can do, as he suggests, with the online harms bill or any other measures to protect people, particularly pensioners, against fraudsters online.
And don't forget, the Prime Minister is asking the countries to get together and clap at 6 o'clock. I'm now suspending the House for 3 minutes to enable... No, they can't come back. I'm just going... Point of order, is it related to Prime...
Mr. Speaker, if it assists the House, perhaps I could help to correct the record. On the 31st of January 2017, the Right Honourable Gentleman opposite told the House, as recorded in Hansard, why would we want to be outside the European Medicines Agency, which ensures that all medicines in the EU market are safe and effective?
Order. We're not continuing the debate. That correction will be on the record, but I'm not reopening a debate. I am suspending the House for 3 minutes to enable the necessary arrangements for the next business to be made. Order.